Welcome back, traveler of stories. When last we left the Iliad, grief had overtaken Achilles, and the Myrmidons mourned beside the still body of Patroclus. Now the storm of wrath begins to rise. Achilles prepares to return to battle, his new armor blazing with the fire of gods, and the fate of Hector draws ever nearer. Let us continue the journey into the heart of vengeance and destiny. The plain lay wide and trembling beneath the thunder of hooves and the cries of men. The smoke that had once risen from the burning ships now drifted thin and broken, its threat gone, beaten into ash by the surge of the Myrmidons. Where despair had crouched at the edges of the Greek camp, now joy roared like a fire newly kindled. Yet joy in war is always hungry. It devours and devours until there is nothing left to eat but sorrow. Patroclus, clad in the borrowed glory of Achilles, stood at the heart of that storm. His spear rose and fell, bronze flashing like lightning, each stroke cutting down another foe. Trojans scattered before him, fleeing across the plain, their voices shrill, their armor clattering in panic. He drove them as a shepherd drives a flock before his dogs, chasing them from the ditch, from the rampart, across the dust-strewn earth that had drunk so much blood. Automedon guided the chariot with a steady hand, Xanthus and Balius flying like spirits of the wind, Pedasus pounding beside them, mortal yet tireless. The wheels cut furrows in the soil, leaving behind a wake of broken spears and fallen men. The Myrmidons pressed close, their cries loud, their blades eager, their hunger sharpened by long idleness. Patroclus's spear found Palamenes, leader of the Paphlagonians, striking him clean through the chest. He toppled from his chariot, his breath leaving him in a single sharp cry. The Myrmidons leapt over his body and pressed on. Next fell Erymas, then Amphoterus, each death a mark in the spreading tide of slaughter. Patroclus shone brighter with every stroke, the likeness of Achilles seeming more and more real, until even the bravest of Trojans dared not meet his eye. Far off on Olympus, Zeus watched, his brow furrowed with the weight of what he saw, for the son of Thetis had asked this very thing, that the Trojans be beaten back so the Greeks would remember their need for Achilles. Yet it was not Achilles who raged upon the field, but Patroclus, beloved companion. Zeus's heart grew heavy, for he knew the thread of Patroclus's life had been spun short. He pitied him, yet pity cannot change the loom of fate. The gods may tug at the fabric, but they cannot unweave what has already been woven. Then came the hour of Sarpedon, son of Zeus, leader of the Lycians, born of a mortal woman, but carrying the blood of Olympus in his veins. He strode among his men with calm strength, his eyes clear, his voice steady. To his warriors he said, "Why do we come to war, if not to stand where death is thickest? If we must die, let us die so that men will say, 'They stood with courage at Troy.'" His words bound the hearts of his followers, and they lifted their shields and moved with him, fearless. Patroclus saw them coming. His spear thirsted, and he urged Automedon forward. The chariot surged, the horses snorting, foam flying from their bridles. The two hosts met with a crash that shook the plain. Bronze rang against bronze, spear splintered upon shield, men shouted as they fell into the dust. Patroclus and Sarpedon faced one another across the clash. Each man knew the other's worth, and in that knowing was respect. Yet respect has no place in war. They raised their spears and hurled. Sarpedon's shaft glanced from the shoulder of Patroclus, biting only the edge of his armor. Patroclus's throw struck true, piercing the strong guard of Sarpedon's chest. The Lycian prince staggered, the bronze deep in his flesh, and fell to the ground like an oak struck by a hidden axe, crashing upon the plain. His breath came shallow, red upon his lips. He called to Glaucus, his comrade. "Friend, do not let me lie here forgotten. Stand fast, save my body from the Greeks, that I may not be meat for dogs and birds. Fight for me as I have fought for you." Then his head sank back, and the light went from his eyes. Sarpedon, son of Zeus, had met his destined end. Zeus' heart groaned within him. He turned to Hera and said, "My beloved son has fallen. Shall I lift him from the field and carry him home, far from this sorrow?" Hera answered sternly, "If you do this, other gods will resent you, for their sons too have gone to war and died. If you save Sarpedon, then every god will demand the same for his blood. Let him fall as fate has decreed, yet grant him honor in death. Send sleep and death to bear his body back to Lycia, where his people may mourn him and raise his tomb." Zeus bowed his head, tears like rain falling upon the peaks of Ida. He commanded Hypnos and Thanatos, gentle twins, to go. They lifted Sarpedon's body, soft as if they bore a child, and carried him through the silent sky, across the long distance to his homeland. There the Lycians would grieve, building a mound upon the earth, telling the tale of their king who died far away, yet returned in the arms of gods. On the field the battle raged still. Around the body of Sarpedon, Greeks and Trojans clashed like two tides meeting upon a shore. Glaucus, weeping and enraged, fought like a man possessed, his spear cutting a path through the foe. Patroclus pressed him hard, driving him back, until at last the Lycians gathered their prince's armor and bore it away. The Trojans reeled, their courage broken. Before them shone Patroclus, helm nodding, shield blazing, spear never still. The Myrmidons followed, fierce as wolves at his side. Together they swept the field, chasing the Trojans ever closer to the walls of Troy. Dust rose in great clouds, cries echoed, and the plain seemed to groan beneath the weight of fate moving forward. Patroclus, exultant, felt his heart swell beyond its bounds. The fire at the ships was quenched, the enemy scattered, the field his to command. He forgot the warning of Achilles, the tide's command to return. His eyes lifted toward the distant walls, and his spirit whispered, "Perhaps today even Troy itself may fall before me." But the gods were watching, and the hour of Patroclus had begun. The plain groaned beneath the weight of war. Though the Trojans no longer pressed forward, they fled before Patroclus, who blazed like a star fallen to earth, scattering fire in every direction. His armor shone, the great shield flashed, and his spear never ceased its work. The Trojans stumbled toward their walls, driven like cattle by a storm, their cries rising to heaven. Already Patroclus had done what Achilles had commanded. The fire was quenched, the ship saved, the enemy driven back from the ditch. But joy and fury burned together in his heart, a flame too hot to master. The taste of triumph was sharp upon his tongue, and he forgot the measure Achilles had set. He turned his eyes toward the towers of Troy, still distant, still proud, and in his breast a reckless voice whispered, "Why not more? Why not today? Why not Troy itself?" Like a hawk stooping upon doves, Patroclus drove the Myrmidons after the fleeing Trojans. He cut down Adrestus, then Autonus. Echeclus fell before his spear, and Paramus beside him. Eleusis, Mulius, and Melanippus followed, each man struck down in his flight, each name written in the dust of the plain. The ground grew thick with bodies, the blood soaking into earth already heavy with sacrifice. High upon Olympus, Apollo watched. His golden eyes narrowed, for he knew the bounds of fate. He saw Patroclus pressing too far, wearing the armor of Achilles, taking upon himself a glory not his own. Anger stirred in the god's heart, not envy, but the justice that guards the balance of mortal life. He descended, unseen, into the din of battle, his presence like a sudden stillness, a chill among flames. 3 times Patroclus surged against the walls of Troy, and 3 times Apollo pushed him back, striking the shield with invisible hands, speaking in a voice that only Patroclus heard. Go no further, mortal. It is not for you to take this city. Destiny has written another hand to raise that trophy, and your hour is not for conquest, but for ending. Yet the fury in Patroclus was deaf, and he pressed on again. At last, Apollo struck him openly. A great blow landed between his shoulders, unseen yet mighty as a mountain wind. His eyes reeled, the helm of Achilles was dashed from his head, the plume falling into dust where it had never lain before. The shining corselet cracked beneath Apollo's hand, the straps loosing, the weight pulling at him. His spear shattered in his grasp, splintered like dry wood. Naked and bewildered, Patroclus staggered, stripped of the divine armor that had made him seem Achilles. In that moment, Euphorbus, a Trojan youth, swift and skilled, darted in. His spear struck Patroclus in the back, piercing between the shoulders. Not mortal in itself, but sharp enough to weaken him, to open the path for another. Patroclus swayed, blood running down his side, and turned to face his foe. Euphorbus fled at the sight of his eyes, for even wounded Patroclus shone with terrible light. Then came Hector. His chariot wheels crushed the dust, his plumes swept like fire above him. He saw Patroclus reeling, saw the armor of Achilles lying broken upon the ground, and his heart leapt with fierce joy. Drawing near, he spoke across the clash. At last, Achilles has fallen into my hands. He hurled his spear, bronze biting deep into Patroclus's body. The force drove him backward, staggering, until he crashed upon the plain. Silence seemed to fall for a heartbeat, as if the earth itself had paused. Then Patroclus, gasping, raised his head. Blood foamed on his lips, his eyes dimming yet still fierce. He spoke with the last strength of his soul. Hector, boast while you can. It was not you nor even Euphorbus, but Apollo who struck me down, stripping the armor from my body. Fate and the son of Leto brought me here, and your spear has finished their work. Yet hear me. You will not live long after me. Already death and doom stand beside you. Already Achilles waits for you in his wrath. With that, his head fell back. His spirit fled from his body, and Patroclus, beloved of Achilles, lay still upon the plain. The Myrmidons cried out in anguish, their voices tearing the sky. The Trojans shouted in triumph, their hope rekindled by the fall. Around the body a storm gathered, men clashing, shields locking, each side striving to claim or to defend the fallen. Blood poured into the dust, the plain echoing with the thunder of war renewed. And in his tent, far from the clash, Achilles felt the shadow of grief approaching, though he knew not yet the full measure of what had been lost. Upon the plain, the storm still raged, but in the distance, in the camp of the Myrmidons, a heavier silence brooded. The sea wind stirred the leather of Achilles' tent, lifting the edges as if to carry tidings none wished to deliver. Achilles sat apart, eyes fixed upon the horizon, the harp of silver lying untouched beside him. His fingers traced no chords, his lips formed no song. He waited, though he knew not what for, a shadow at his shoulder whispering of sorrow. Then came Antilochus, son of Nestor, running swift as a man pursued by doom. His hair was dark with sweat, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with the burden of what he bore. He rushed through the ranks of the Myrmidons, past the murmurs of men already fearing the truth, and burst into the tent. His voice broke as he cried, "Patroclus has fallen. Hector has slain him. The armor of Achilles lies upon another man." The words struck like bronze upon bronze, like a hammer blow to the heart. Achilles rose, then staggered as though the ground had betrayed him. His face contorted, his voice lifted in a cry so terrible that Thetis herself heard it far below, deep in her salt, dark home beneath the sea. He threw dust upon his head, black dust mingling with golden hair, and he lay upon the ground, tearing at his tunic, rending his flesh with his nails as grief devoured him. The Myrmidons gathered outside the tent, beating their breasts, weeping, their voices one with their lord's lament. The camp itself trembled with the sound, and men across the beach turned their heads, stricken though they knew not yet the cause. From the depths of ocean, Thetis heard. She rose, leaving the halls of Nereus, the sea nymphs her daughters following, 50 in all, their veils of foam trailing behind them. Together, they surged upward, breaking the surface in a crown of white. They gathered upon the shore, the waves lapping at their ankles, and their voices rose in keening. The sea itself seemed to mourn, its surf falling heavy, its tide drawn thin as though sharing in the sorrow. Thetis went to her son. She knelt beside him, her cool hands touching his face, her tears falling upon his hair. "Child of my womb," she said, "why do you weep? Speak to me." For my heart already knows. Achilles lifted his head, eyes swollen, voice raw with anguish. "Mother, Patroclus is dead. Hector has slain him, stripped him of my armor, and now he lies dishonored upon the plain. I am bereft. I live, yet half my soul is gone. Would that I had died long ago. For what is life without the friend who was as my own heart? Even now I see him in my mind, his smile, his hand upon my shoulder. And it rends me to know I shall not see him again." Thetis rocked him as she had when he was a child, though he was a man grown, fierce and terrible. She wept with him, her voice breaking like waves upon the rocks. Yet she whispered, "You will have vengeance, my son. But vengeance is a bitter draught, and once drunk it leaves the lips dry forever. If you choose this path, you will bring Hector low, but your own life will not be long thereafter." Achilles lifted his face, tears streaking the dust. His voice was iron through grief. "Then let it be so. If I cannot save Patroclus, I will honor him with Hector's death. Let my own fate come after. I care nothing now for life, nor for home, nor for glory, save this one thing, that the slayer of my dearest friend shall not escape. Bring me arms, mother, for I will not live another day in idleness while Patroclus lies cold." Thetis bowed her head, sorrow deeper than the sea itself within her. She knew she could not save him from the destiny already woven, but she promised, "I will go to Hephaestus, master of fire and forge. He will fashion for you new armor, stronger than any upon this earth. Wait, my son, until I return, and then your wrath shall blaze." She rose, the nymphs surrounding her, and together they descended again into the sea, their voices fading like wind through reeds. But Achilles remained, kneeling in the dust, his heart a furnace of grief and rage. The Myrmidons circled him, silent, afraid, for they saw that their lord was no longer the man they had known, but something greater and more terrible. Sorrow given the shape of vengeance. Far above, the gods watched. Zeus sighed, for he knew the balance of the world had shifted. The hour of Hector was marked, the hour of Achilles too. The plain of Troy waited, the dust eager for new blood, the river longing for new bodies. Fate moved, inexorable, like the turning of the stars. And in the tent of Achilles, the greatest of the Achaeans wept for the friend he had lost. And the sound of his lament carried across sea and sky, shaking even the hearts of gods. The sea received Thetis as a mother receives a child, without question, with infinite, wordless knowledge. Down she went through the cool, green halls where light is a patient visitor. The daughters of Nereus followed like pale flames under water, their hair flowing in long, silk currents, their hands outstretched in comfort and in sorrow. They passed forests of kelp that swayed to ocean breath, and valleys of white sand rippled like the backs of sleeping beasts. The further they went, the quieter the world became, until only the steady heart of the sea remained, a deep drum no storm could silence. She turned eastward at last and rose again, breaking the surface near an island edged with black stone. There, behind a curtain of steam, the house of Hephaestus stood, half cliff, half furnace. Its doors were bronze, its lintels scarred with the finger marks of fire. Within, the bellows slept and woke in turns, drinking wind, exhaling flame. Anvils lay like fallen meteors. Tongs and hammers gleamed with the memory of 1,000 labors. Golden handmaids moved among the benches, living craft made in the shape of girls, their eyes bright with borrowed light. They walked with minds imbued to know and hands instructed to serve, and wherever they passed, the air grew orderly. Charis, the gracious, came first, smiling with warmth that made steel forget its hardness. "Sea-born queen," she said, "why do the waters mourn?" Thetis answered with no more words than were needed, and grief filled the spaces between them with its own speech. Charis led her inward, and the heat increased as if the heart of the island had drawn closer. Hephaestus came limping from the fire's red country, his shoulders broad, beard ash-dusted, eyes bright as coals in wind. He saw Thetis and put aside his hammer as a king sets down a scepter to embrace an old friend. "You lifted me once," he said, "when Olympus cast me out and the sea was kinder than the sky. What you ask now, if it is within my craft, no hand shall refuse." He gestured to the long bench where new bronze waited in rough cakes, and to the trays of precious metals, gold like captured noon, silver like night's first blade, tin pale as cloud, and black iron that remembers mountains. Thetis spoke of Achilles, of Patroclus fallen, of the grief that had filled the tent until even the harp could not bear to make a sound. She did not plead. She placed the truth before him like metal upon an anvil and waited for the answer of his art. Hephaestus nodded. "Then let us make a storm for your son to wear." He turned, and the bellows woke all together, rising and bowing with a giant's breath. Blue tongues of fire leapt. The floor shivered almost musically. 100 small sounds gathered into one laboring hymn. He began with the Greaves, bronze fitted to the line of a swift man's shin, edges rolled so they would not bite the flesh, clasps cunningly made so a single motion would bind and free. Then the corselet, layered and chased, its weight distributed like thought across a wise mind. The helm next, with a crest that would catch the sun and throw it back, so that in the crush of war a man's enemies would feel themselves looked upon by daylight itself. These were wonders, but these are preludes. Last he drew to him the great, round blank of a shield, raw metal, broad as a small moon and almost as promising. He set it on the turntable and bent close, seeing within the shining the cities and fields that had not yet been born upon it. Charis brought trays of soft gold. The handmaid set out tiny chisels, burins, and punches fine as whispers. Hephaestus warmed the blank until the color ran through it like dawn through cloud. Then with blows precise as stars, he began to speak the world into the metal. He rimmed the shield first with a triple border, so strength would be patient. Then he called the outermost river, the one that girdles all things. Ocean flowed along the edge, a ring of moving water fixed in motion, its waves crested with silver, its depths darkened with alloy, until a man who looked could almost hear the hush and surge of it. The shield would bear the world, and the world would be circled by the sea, as true things are. Within that boundary, he made a heaven. The constellations woke one by one. The great bear turning on her slow axle, a shepherd forever watchful, Orion striding with his belt of three, the Pleiades clustered like seeds under a thumb, the dog star biting with cold fire. A thin sickle of moon leaned over them, and a sun notched with rays moved through a path of hammered light. Each mark was a law. Each law would be remembered by bronze long after singers forgot their songs. Beneath the sky, he set two cities, twins by nature, not by peace. The first was a city of marriage and music. Brides were led with torches through streets strewn with petals. Flutes and lyres braided their voices. Dancers turned like corn in a soft wind. At the gate, elders sat upon polished stones and judged a quarrel that had come to them wrapped in oaths. Two men disputed the price of blood. Witnesses raised hands. Heralds hushed the crowd. Each elder spoke in turn, the gold in their staves catching the sun. And in the end, the people weighed the verdict with a murmur that sounded like a river thinking. The second city lived under the red logic of war. Men stood in bronze along the wall. Their women watched with eyes that knew the shape of departure. Ambush coils in alleys, scouts run, the gate bursts. A fight at the watering place, where common need makes uncommon danger. A struggle over the body of a fallen man, men tugging like tides at a moon. Hephaestus gave to their shields small dents of light, and to their spears the bright quiver of choice. You could almost hear the clatter, almost feel the question that all sieges ask. How much of ourselves do we trade for safety? He set plowed fields beyond, furrows neat as writing. Under the plowshare the earth folded back like clean linen. Oxen leaned into the yoke and knew they were strong. A farmer paused to wipe his brow. A boy walked behind with a goad and learned that patience has a shape. Farther on, he raised harvest. Reapers in a golden swath, arms working in a rhythm older than speech. Binders following, stacking sheaves. A child lifting a stray head of grain as if it were a treasure. A king under a tree receiving cups of wine as the field made him equal to his people for one thankful hour. Next, he hammered a vineyard, rows running along a slope that looked westward. Grapes hung heavy, a purple grammar teaching the tongue to be grateful. Youths laughed with baskets at their hips, and girls walked between the lines, their feet quick, their hair caught up lest sweetness slow them. A boy's pipe made thin music, and even the leaves seemed to listen. Hephaestus gave the wine a glimmer, as if it remembered starlight from when it was water. He fashioned a herd at pasture, cows with backs broad and hides glossy, calves skipping in a geometry of joy. 2 lions took 1 bull at the throat, not wickedness, only hunger's autograph. And herdsmen shouted and beat at them with staffs that were brave but not persuasive. Dogs leapt, teeth bright, tails high, the whole scene alive with the rule that life writes across itself again and again. We have and we lose, and still we go on. He made a dancing floor after that, wide, smooth, edged with a rail of loving craft. Young men and maidens moved there, hand in hand, feet learning to be precise and weightless at once. 1 line unwound and rewound. Another made a knot that dissolved and reappeared. A boy turned and leapt. A girl caught a garland and did not drop it. Around them stood parents with faces that have been taught to be both proud and afraid. Music hung above the floor in shapes the eye could nearly see. All these Hephaestus set within circles that nested, each scene speaking to the next, each bound by ocean at the rim. Between the large works he pressed small marvels. A fox among vines cleverer than traps. A woman spinning by a doorway while a child sleeps. Rain beginning on one side of a hill and sunshine holding on the other. 2 travelers sharing bread without a word, a shepherd counting and losing count and smiling anyway. The shield learned a world, and the world learned itself reflected. When the pictures were done, he polished the face until it held a weather of its own. Then he riveted grip to boss, fitted arm straps of soft leather backed by bronze, and balanced the whole upon 1 finger to test whether purpose and beauty had agreed on weight. They had. He set the shield aside, and it cooled with a sound like a long breath released. Charis and the handmaids brought the other pieces, the greaves that would answer a runner's stride and not complain, the corselet with its bright interlocking scales, the helm whose crest would startle noon, a spear shaft straight as a thought before it meets the world. Hephaestus looked once more at the work, not with vanity but with a maker's clean pride. Let grief arm itself, he said softly, not as a blessing and not as a curse, but as a fact. Thetis stood, and in the glow her sorrow seemed almost transparent, like water held in a bowl of light. She raised both hands, and the armor rose obediently, for it knew to whom it belonged and for whom it had been made. "I thank you," she said, and in the smith's house gratitude rang truer than bronze. Hephaestus inclined his head. The bellows fell quiet. The fire sat back upon its haunches. Outside, the steam drifted. Gulls complained at the heat and then forgave it. Down again went Thetis into the sea, her daughters at her sides, the new-forged world bright upon her arms. The water closed over them with a silk sound. They moved through lanes of green and blue, and the armor shed a faint radiance that taught small fish the taste of awe. Above, the war waited. On the shore, grief knelt. In a tent, a man had forgotten how to be anything but the husk that remains when a name is taken from a heart. The goddess rose toward him, bearing a shield that contained cities, seasons, beasts, and dances. A shield that could remember everything for a man who would soon remember nothing but revenge. Dawn lifted its pale fire above the sea once more, and the long plain of Troy stirred with the restless breathing of armies. Smoke lingered over the wreckage of the previous day, curling upward like faint lament. In the camp of the Myrmidons, where grief had taken root, men walked softly, as if the very air might shatter. Their lord remained within his tent, head bowed, eyes hollow, while beside him lay the still body of Patroclus, veiled in linen, attended by weeping companions. The silence there was heavy as iron, broken only by the sea wind sighing through the seams of leather. Then the waters of the bay parted, lifting in a slow arch, and Thetis emerged, radiant and grave, the daughters of Nereus surrounding her in a halo of foam. She bore in her arms the armor wrought by Hephaestus, its glow so fierce that men turned away, covering their eyes, whispering that a star had fallen among them. Even in daylight it blazed, brighter than flame, steadier than moonlight, a work no mortal could have fashioned. Thetis entered the tent. She found her son still bowed beside the body of Patroclus. She set down the armor, and the tent itself seemed to widen, filled with the brilliance of bronze and gold. "My child," she said, "grief will not be gentle with you. But take now these gifts, arms stronger than any man has borne, forged by the hand that shapes fire itself. In them you will meet your fate, but before that you will bring Hector down." Achilles lifted his eyes. The light of the armor caught in his tears, making them shine like metal in a forge. He rose and touched each piece, wonder mingling with fury. "No man has ever held such arms," he said, "and no man will wear them after me. If the gods have set the hour of my death, then let me meet it in splendor, and let Troy tremble before my wrath." The Myrmidons gazed upon the armor as upon a miracle. Each man felt his courage harden, as if the bronze had struck iron within their chests. Automedon lifted the helm, Alcimus touched the greaves, but none dared hold them long, for they seemed alive, breathing, almost whispering. Yet grief had not finished speaking. Achilles turned to the body of Patroclus and fell upon his knees. "Forgive me, friend," he cried, his voice breaking the still air. "I was not there when you fell. I did not guard you as I swore. But hear me now. I will not rest. I will not eat. I will not sleep until Hector lies dead before you. I will bring him bound to your pyre, and only then shall you and I feast together in the land of the dead." His words rang like oaths hammered into bronze. Outside, a murmur rose among the Greek captains. They had heard Achilles' voice, and they knew the tide of war had turned. Agamemnon came, shoulders wrapped in bandages, pride softened by loss. He stood before Achilles, hesitant, and then spoke. "Fierce son of Peleus, I was blind with anger, and my folly has cost us dear. I wronged you. Take back your honor, and with it, lead us to salvation." Achilles looked upon him, and his wrath burned anew. "You shamed me. You stole what was mine, and because of it, Patroclus is dead. No gifts can balance that. Yet I will not let your quarrel stand between me and vengeance. Keep your treasures. Keep your apologies. I fight not for you, but for him who lies within this tent." Agamemnon bowed his head, chastened, and withdrew. Odysseus, ever the wise, counseled, "But even vengeance requires strength. You have fasted in grief. Let food and drink pass your lips, for the body cannot strike when it is hollow." But Achilles refused. "Wine and bread are for the living. Until Hector lies in the dust, my hunger is for nothing but his death." The armor was laid before him. Piece by piece he donned it, and with each part the light in the tent grew sharper. The greaves clasped themselves upon his legs as if they had always belonged there. The corselet settled upon his chest like a second skin, unyielding, perfect. The helm, with its long horsehair plume, nodded as he lifted it, the sound of its crest brushing against air like a lion's growl. Last he took the great shield, and when he raised it, the whole tent flared with the brilliance of suns and moons and cities and fields, an entire world held in a circle of bronze. The Myrmidons fell to their knees, unable to look full upon it. Achilles stood now as more than a man. Grief, rage, and destiny wrapped him in a terrible beauty. He stepped out into the daylight, and the whole host of the Greeks turned as if drawn by one force. A murmur rose like wind through pine trees. Achilles has returned. From the walls of Troy, watchers saw the blaze of his armor, and fear ran through the city like cold water. Mothers clutched their children, old men muttered prayers, and even Hector, though steadfast, felt the stir of dread within his breast. For he knew that the hour of reckoning had come, and that the plain of Troy was no longer wide enough for both men to live. Achilles lifted his voice, and the sound rolled across the beach and plain like thunder. Trojans, hear me. Soon you will pay for the blood of Patroclus. Hector, son of Priam, your fate is sealed. His words carried to every ear, and men shuddered, for they heard in them not boast, but prophecy. The sea wind rose, lifting the horsehair plume upon his helm, making it dance like flame. Around him, the Myrmidons struck their spears upon their shields, their cry a wall of iron sound. The day darkened slightly, though the sun still shone, as if the heavens themselves bent low to watch. And thus Achilles returned, not the boy who had left Phthia, not the man who had quarreled in pride, but a figure vast, radiant, and terrible. Grief and wrath braided into one unstoppable force. Word moved through the Greek camp like wind that doesn't yet show itself on the sea. Achilles would fight. Men straightened their belts and checked their straps, not because he needed them, but because the world needs to feel ready when a great thing begins. Before the tent of the Myrmidons lay the body of Patroclus, veiled in clean linen. Beside him, jars of oil and bowls of fresh-cut herbs waited for rites not yet permitted. A hush lived there, the kind that asks even the breeze to lower its voice. Briseis came with the gifts returned from Agamemnon's pavilion. Gold, tripods, a hum of apologies carried by hands. She did not look at the treasure. She knelt by Patroclus and broke into the old music of grief. "Gentle one," she said, "you promised I would be a wife beneath Achilles' roof, and you would speak well of me at the wedding fire." Her hands found the linen and did not lift it. "Now I have no promise and no roof." The women who tended the tent wept with her, for sorrow spreads like flame where love has left dry kindling. Achilles stood at the door, armor bright as a cold noon. The light off the newly forged bronze climbed the tent walls and settled there as if it had discovered a home. He spoke without turning away from the field. "We weep now, we burn later, we eat last." The Myrmidons heard and took the order into their backs and shoulders. In this army, grief was a law that did not cancel duty. Odysseus and Nestor, wise with different kinds of wisdom, pressed him. At least bread, at least a cup. "An empty body does a poor day's work," said Odysseus. Achilles shook his head. "My hunger has changed its name." Then, as pity without softness, Athena came, invisible, and touched his breast with the quiet of ambrosia. Strength settled inside him, like a secret that would last the day. He felt it and did not thank her. Gods know their economy. The horses stamped and tossed. Automedon stood with the reins looped in his fist, the leather humming. Xanthus turned his fine head, and the sweep of his mane made a new weather around him. Balius pawed furrows into the damp sand. Pedasus waited with the modest patience of the mortal who knows he runs among greater things. Achilles stepped to the yoke, and for a heartbeat time thought of stopping to see what came next. He laid a hand on the withers of Xanthus and spoke, a man asking his craft to remember him. "Bring me back," he said, "when the thing that must be done is done." And the horse, granted once a mortal tongue by Hera's will, answered, not like a beast, nor like a god, but like something very old. "We will bring you back, Achilles," said Xanthus, "but not for long. A god and a man stand between you and any homeward road." The reins trembled. Automedon's eyes widened. Balius blew out a breath that sounded like winter through reeds. Achilles smiled without mirth. "I know," he said. "It is not your office to prophesy. Run." Up on Olympus, Zeus stood and opened his hand. "The hour has grown too heavy for men alone," he said, and the air took orders from him. The gods answered as soldiers do when their names are called. Hera, white-armed, went to the Greek lines with a satisfaction she did not decorate. Athena took her place beside her, helm lowered, gray gaze level. Poseidon rose dripping from the surf and stood behind the rampart with the careful love a builder keeps for well-set beams. On the Trojan side, Apollo slung his bow and smiled in the way a bright thing can be cruel. Artemis moved like a cool shadow at noon. Ares' laugh carried the clatter of shields inside it. Aphrodite, whose craft is not the field, threaded the city with hands ready to lift the fallen she loved. Hermes hovered at the edge of everything, ready to guide souls if called upon. Hephaestus watched, thoughtful, one hand on the invisible leash of fire. The plain felt a new weight, like weather gathering behind a ridge. Achilles mounted the chariot. Automedon raised the lash. The horses leaned, the axles sang. The Myrmidons formed in behind, ranks clean as writing, spearheads a field of pale stars under sun. They moved not like men eager to arrive, but like a tide certain of its shore. As they reached the rampart, Achilles stood tall, and the great crest nodded. From his head, the light of Hephaestus's work went up like a visible thought. Athena took that light in both hands and shaped it into terror. Then Achilles shouted. It was not a word. It was what words come from. It ran across the ditch and over the plain, into the bones of men, into the reins of horses, into the breath between chariot and wheel. 3 times he gave that cry. The first time, helmets rang in answer. The second, spears wavered. The third, hearts made a small, involuntary motion toward home. Torches fell from hands. A ladder slipped back into the ditch with 2 men still on it. A driver pulled too hard and turned his team into his own wheels. Where the shout ended, silence did not return. Something thinner did. Room for the Greeks to breathe. From the wall the Trojans saw the blaze and knew the name before they saw the man. "Achilles," someone said in a voice that had planned to say something else. Hector felt the old cold coin press into his palm, the one every warrior carries to spend once. He closed his hand over it and turned his horses. "Hold the plane," he told the captains. "Keep your lines." The gods stand with us, but even gods prefer men who stand with themselves. The first cast of Achilles' spear found his shield, punched through, and made a man think of sudden rain where there had been no cloud. The second stroke was closer work, a thrust under a rim where habit keeps a weakness. The bronze answered like a bell under a careful hammer. He did not linger over any fall. This was not the hunting he had loved as a boy. It was a straight road through men toward one man. Apollo, offended and bright, stepped in front of the fear that ran among his Trojans and steadied it with a glance. "Not yet," he said into Hector's ear, and Hector felt his spine agree. Ares encouraged the noisy and the rash and sent them forward. Athena moved among the Greek shields and made their edges remember they are edges. Poseidon pushed back against Trojan bridges as water pushes against the ankles of a man who would cross too soon. From time to time, Zeus's thunder rolled far away. Not promise, not warning, just the large sound of a world aware of itself. Around the ships, men who had despaired until noon learned a new arithmetic. Where Achilles stood, 10 men could rest one breath. Where his chariot passed, ladders leaned the other way. Where the shield's world faced outward, the outer world became less sure of its own borders. Teucer's arrows, heartened, began to find their manners again. Ajax, seeing the blaze, stood more easily in his heavy width. Menelaus set 3 ranks straight with the length of a look. Even Odysseus, who trusted plans more than prodigies, let a small faith sit beside his caution. Hector, striving to hold shape in the Trojans' line, sent Sarpedon's captains, though their prince lay elsewhere honored. He called names that men liked to hear themselves be called. And they came. The front steadied. Hector's spear glanced off Achilles' new-forged corselet and learned that some labor belongs to gods alone. Achilles' answer cut the axle of a chariot and made geometry out of panic. The horses tore free and went where horses go when the day forgets them. A lull paused on the knife edge. Dust hung without choosing a direction. Then Achilles lifted the shield, and the sun caught its cities, its fields, its dances. Men saw their own lives there, and, seeing, understood in a way no speech could have taught. A world had been hammered for this moment, to be carried by the man who now walked into their fear. The lull broke. The Greeks advanced as if a hand had pressed their backs. The Trojans yielded a little, not a rout, but the small, important step that admits the next. Behind Achilles, the Myrmidons kept their formation like a promise. Automedon's shoulders knew where the chariot wanted to be and put it there. Xanthus and Balios ran so close to the ground that dust seemed to lift for them in respect. Pedasus pounded without poetry and was perfect for it. High above, Hera and Athena shared a look that was not a smile. Apollo measured Achilles with an archer's calm and touched the strings of an unseen bow. Ares prowled the edge of the melee, sniffing for boast and blood. Aphrodite listened in Troy for the first sound that means a mother cannot stand. Poseidon leaned a little nearer to the rampart so that the sea's breath could reach exhausted mouths. Hephaestus turned his palm downward as if to shelter a flame. So Achilles came back into the war, not as a man merely, not as a quarrel mended, but as a weather the plain would wear until it broke. His cry had shaken horses. His light had bent shadows. His name had made strong men rehearse the taste of fear. Ahead lay Hector and the long noon between them. And after that, the river that keeps count. and after that, the quiet that even bronze cannot fill. But for now there was the march, the blaze, the line moving, and the knowledge in gods and men alike that the story had shifted its weight to one side. The plain of Troy, long accustomed to blood, had never seen its like. Achilles, radiant in the new forged armor, advanced as if the day itself had taken form in bronze and fire. His shield flung back the sun, his helm blazed with its streaming plume, and in his eyes burned a hunger that no mortal feast could satisfy. Before him the Trojans quailed, for they felt not merely a man's return, but the approach of something larger, heavier, inevitable. The first he struck was Iphition, noble-born, child of a river and a princess of Troy. Proud he had come forth, his lineage a banner. Proud he fell, pierced through by the ash-wood spear that ran him clean, his body crashing upon the dust as though the very earth claimed him. Achilles did not pause. Next he met Demoleon, stout defender, and felled him with a thrust that split both shield and sternum. Hippodamas followed, screaming as the spear took him, his cry cut short as oxen are cut short beneath a knife at sacrifice. Each stroke was swift, each death inevitable, and men fled before him as dry leaves before a gale. The Scamander River saw and shuddered. Its waters ran red as the Myrmidons pressed behind their lord, cutting men down, dragging them from their chariots, spearing them in flight. Dust rose like storm clouds, hiding the plain. But within that cloud, Achilles moved like lightning, sudden, searing, impossible to stand against. He met Asteropaeus, a warrior favored by the river itself. Twice Asteropaeus cast his spears, and twice they struck true, one grazing the rim of Achilles' shield, the other glancing from his corselet, leaving only the smallest scar. Achilles laughed, not in mirth, but in terrible disdain. He lifted his own spear, ash-tipped with bronze, and hurled it. It drove through Asteropaeus' belly, pinning him to the ground, and as he writhed, Achilles wrenched free his weapon, leaving the man to choke on dust and blood. And still he slew Thersilochus and Medon, Astypolus and Menesis, Arelios and Ophelestes. Each name fell into silence with the man who bore it. The river ran heavy with corpses, its banks choked with the bodies of the slain. So many fell that Scamander, father of streams, raised his voice. From the depths of his current he cried, "Achilles, you glut yourself on the slaughter of men. My waters are swollen with bodies, my flow choked with the dead. Show mercy, son of Peleus. Go forth upon the plain and let the river cleanse itself of blood." But Achilles, mad with wrath, answered, "Mercy? Did Hector show mercy to Patroclus? Did Trojans show mercy when the fire touched our ships? No, river. If your waters drown me, still I will not stop until Hector lies in dust." He plunged deeper, spearing, cutting, casting men into the current until the river could bear no more. Then Scamander rose, its waters swelling, surging, roaring with fury. It lifted waves against Achilles, sweeping corpses aside, rushing with a torrent fierce enough to break oaks and roll boulders. The hero stumbled, nearly overwhelmed, as the river tried to smother him, its coils of foam and flood wrapping him like serpents. He leapt to higher ground, but the water followed, crashing over banks, foaming around his legs, drenching his bright armor. The river roared, "Enough! You are but one man, and you defy me as though you were a god." Achilles lifted his voice to heaven, calling out to Zeus. The sky answered not with words, but with the sudden blaze of fire. Hephaestus came at Hera's bidding, and flame leapt across the plain, a wall of heat that hissed where it touched the waters. Scamander writhed, boiling, its waves shrieking as fire devoured reeds and grasses along its banks. Smoke and steam rose, choking the air, until the river recoiled, beaten, retreating to its bed. Still it murmured curses, but it yielded, and Achilles stood victorious even against the elements themselves. Breathing hard, dripping, his eyes wild, he strode back into the fray. Men scattered at his approach, whole companies breaking as if they had never been soldiers. The ground was littered with weapons, with shields dropped in panic, with helmets cast aside by men who prayed only for swiftness of foot. And yet Achilles did not relent. His spear drank deep, his sword flashed, his fury unquenched. The Trojans cried to their gods. Apollo answered, steadying their line, whispering courage into Hector's heart. For the day had drawn near when Hector and Achilles would meet, and all the slaughter until now had been but the prologue to that fated clash. The plain groaned under the harvest of bronze. Where Achilles passed, the earth drank deep. The dust turned dark, the grasses bent beneath the weight of men fallen never to rise. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and the bitter smoke of sacrifice. His spear struck, his sword cleaved, his shield rang with blows that never broke it, and each heartbeat brought another life ended. He slew Dryops by the river bank, piercing his throat so that the man's song ended in a wet gurgle. He felled Demucius, tall and proud, breaking his skull with the hilt of his sword. Laegonus and Dardanus, sons of Bias, rushed him together. One stroke split them apart, their bodies falling as trees fall in opposite directions when the wind chooses both at once. Tros, son of Alastor, clasped his knees and begged for mercy, promising ransom rich with gold. Achilles answered not with words, but with a thrust through his liver, saying only, "Fool, beg from death, for no man else will hear you." The plain filled with names swallowed in blood. Echeclus, Deucalion, Rigmus of Thrace, and his driver Ariadhaus, all cast down before the storm. The chariot wheels splashed through gore, the horses' hooves struck sparks as if they ran upon stone. Automedon steered, sweat on his brow, but his hand steady as the horizon. Behind them, the Myrmidons pressed, their bronze a forest of burning leaves. From the walls of Troy, watchers wailed. Mothers tore their veils, old men beat their staffs upon stone, and children cried for fathers they would not see again. Within the palace, Priam stood upon the tower, his heart torn as he looked across the plain where his sons fell like sheaves beneath the scythe. Beside him Hecuba lifted her hands to heaven, crying to the gods who seemed deaf to her pleas. Andromache, in her chamber, felt her breath shorten, though no messenger had yet come. Her heart knew, as a bird knows storm before the cloud. Still Achilles raged. He hurled Trojans into the river until its waters stank of blood and clotted with corpses. He stripped armor from the dead until piles of bronze gleamed among the reeds. He chased men down as a lion chases deer, leaping, crushing, unstoppable. Panic spread like fire through dry straw. Some fled for the gates, their voices shrill with terror. Others hid among corpses, hoping the storm would pass them by. A few still stood, only to be broken, yet not all was given to him. Apollo walked beside the fleeing Trojans, unseen but steady. He lifted men when they stumbled, guided spears to miss their mark, wrapped Hector in a cloak of courage. Again and again, when Achilles would have struck Hector, Apollo turned the point aside, blinding the hero's eyes with sudden dazzle, or carrying Hector a pace beyond reach. The god's voice murmured in Hector's heart, "Stand, son of Priam, for the hour of fate is not yet. But soon the plain will narrow to you and one other, and then the measure shall be taken." 3 times Achilles drove the Trojans to their gates, and 3 times Apollo threw confusion among them, so that the walls did not yet fall. Each time the crowd poured inward, choking the streets, trampling one another in panic, until the gates groaned upon their hinges. And each time Hector turned, his spear lifted, calling men back, shaming them with words, pleading with them with eyes. His courage held the line, but thinly, like a thread drawn across a flood. At last, the Trojans crowded within their walls, the dust of the plain settling over their abandoned dead. Only Hector remained without, standing before the Scaean gate, his plume lifting in the wind, his breath steady though his heart was heavy. Behind him the people begged, "Come inside." "Do not face him. Save yourself. Save the city, save us all." Priam lifted his voice from the tower, aged and breaking. "My son, do not meet him. I am old. I cannot bear your death. Enter while the gods still grant it." And Hecuba cried with arms outstretched, "Hector, child of my womb, pity me. I bore you, I nursed you. Do not let the dogs of the Achaeans tear you." But Hector's heart was firm. He thought of honor, of shame, of the eyes of Troy upon him. He thought of Andromache, of their infant son Astyanax, of the life he wished to protect. Yet more than all, he thought of the weight of destiny. He could not turn away, for his name would be less than nothing if he shrank before Achilles. Better to meet fate openly, to stand as long as a man might stand, than to wither in retreat. So he waited before the gate, alone upon the plain, the walls of Troy at his back, the whole city watching. And across the field the dust rising again, for Achilles was coming. The plain lay hushed. Dust hung in the air like a curtain between life and death. At the Scaean gate, Hector stood, the plume upon his helm lifting with each faint wind. His hands gripped his spear, his shield's rim pressed against his thigh. Behind him, the voices of Troy clamored, pleas from father, mother, wife, and people. Before him the earth stretched wide and empty, save for one figure striding nearer with every heartbeat. Achilles came. His armor blazed like a small sun, the new forged bronze singing with each movement. His shield, bearing the world itself, flung back daylight. His helm's crest shook like fire. Around him the dust curled, but could not dim him. His pace was steady, relentless, like the march of time itself. Hector's breath grew heavy. He looked upon the man who approached, and fear like no other fear took root in him. Yet he was Hector, breaker of horses, pride of Troy, and he could not flee, not while all eyes were upon him. He told his heart, "Stand. Better to fall in battle than to live in shame." Yet when Achilles drew near, wrath shining like a god, Hector's courage trembled. His knees weakened, his hands shook, and suddenly he turned and ran. The Trojans upon the wall gasped, the Greeks shouted in scorn. But Achilles smiled, for rage loves the chase. He pursued, his feet swift as hawk upon dove. Once around the walls they ran, Hector in flight, Achilles behind, their shadows racing across the gates, their breath burning in the air. Twice they circled, the city trembling with the thunder of their steps. 3 times they coursed the great walls, Priam's hands raised to heaven, Hecuba tearing her hair, Andromache fainting upon the tower. On Olympus, the gods looked down. Zeus held the scales of fate, placing on each side the lives of Achilles and Hector. The balance dipped, and Hector's lot sank toward death. Then Athena, wise and pitiless, descended to the plain. She came in the shape of Deiphobus, Hector's brother, calling to him with a voice of comfort, "Brother, do not run alone. I am here beside you. Together we shall face him." Hector's heart lifted at the lie, courage returning. He stopped, turned, and stood firm at last. Achilles halted, spear poised, eyes blazing. He called across the space, "Hector, no more flight. You have taken my dearest friend, and now dogs and birds shall feast on your flesh." Hector answered with dignity, "I wronged you not by choice, but by war's decree. Let us make a pact. Whichever falls, let his body be given back to his people, so that burial rites may honor him." But Achilles' rage had no room for mercy. No oaths between lions and men, no pacts between wolves and lambs. "Between you and me, Hector, there is only death." So saying, he lifted his spear and hurled it. Hector crouched, and the bronze flashed past, striking the earth. Athena, unseen, returned the weapon to Achilles' hand. Hector cast his spear in reply. It struck the shield, but the god-forged circle held, the point skittering away, harmless. He turned to his brother for another spear, but Deiphobus was gone. Then Hector knew the truth. The gods had abandoned him. His heart sank, yet he resolved to stand. Achilles advanced, spear raised. Hector lifted his shield high, the rim ringing with each blow. 3 times Achilles struck, and 3 times Hector's arm shuddered under the force. At last, Achilles feinted high and thrust low, driving the point through Hector's throat where the collarbone leaves a gap. The spear pierced, blood poured dark, and Hector fell to his knees. Still he spoke, gasping, voice a thread. "Do not leave me to the dogs, Achilles. By your parents, by the love you bore Patroclus, grant me my body's return to Troy." Achilles bent close, his face terrible. "Beg no more. Would that my rage could drive me to eat you raw. Patroclus lies dead, and you shall pay. Dogs and vultures will tear you before your people's eyes." Hector's sight dimmed, yet with his last breath he prophesied, "Achilles, your death too waits at the Scaean gate. Paris and Apollo shall bring you low." Then his head fell, and the life went out of him. The Trojans cried aloud from the walls, their grief a wail that shook the stones. The Greeks shouted in triumph, their voices lifting to heaven. Achilles stood over his fallen foe, glory and wrath burning together. He stripped the armor from Hector's body, the same armor once his own, taken from Patroclus, now reclaimed. Then, in a deed that made even his comrades shudder, he pierced Hector's heels, threaded them with thongs, and bound them to his chariot. He mounted, Automedon raised the reins, and the horses surged forward. The body of Hector dragged in the dust, his hair streaming, his face marred, his people watching from the walls in horror. 3 times Achilles circled the city with his dreadful prize, rage blinding him to pity, to honor, to the cries of gods and men alike. Above, Zeus turned his face in sorrow, and even the immortals wept for Hector, noblest of Troy. But Achilles' heart was stone, and his wrath unspent. Night settled upon the plain, yet no peace followed it. The Greek fires burned in long rows along the shore, their smoke rising into the darkness, their sparks drifting like stars that had chosen to remain near the earth. In the camp of the Myrmidons, A greater fire burned unseen, the grief of Achilles, unquenchable, unending. He had dragged Hector's body to the ships and left it there, bound and defiled, while the dust of Troy still clung to its hair. Yet though vengeance had been taken, no balm touched his heart. Again and again he walked to where Patroclus lay, wrapped in linen, perfumed with oils, the face he loved veiled but not forgotten. He sat beside him and spoke as if his friend still heard. "Patroclus, my dearest, I have done as I swore. Hector lies dead, shamed before his people. Yet you do not rise. You do not smile. My soul is half empty without you. Soon I too will join you, for I know my fate. But until then, I will honor you as no man has ever been honored." Through the night, he refused food, refused sleep, keeping vigil beside the body. The Myrmidons wept with him, their grief echoing his, but none dared speak comfort, for who could comfort the unconsolable? When dawn came, he called the army together. Upon the shore they built a pyre, vast as a hill, wood stacked in towering layers, logs of pine and oak hewn from the nearby forests. Around it they placed jars of honey and oil, vessels of bright gold, the fruits of victory gathered from long years of war. Horses were led forth, sleek and proud, their manes braided, their eyes dark with fear, for they too would follow Patroclus into death. Hounds, faithful to their master, whined as they were brought near, and oxen were yoked no more, but felled with a single stroke, their bodies laid upon the pile. Achilles stood at the pyre's head, his hair unbound, streaming like night against the brilliance of his armor. He cut a lock from his head, the golden strands falling into his hand, and placed it upon Patroclus's chest. His voice broke as he said, "Once I promised my father I would offer this hair upon the river's altar in Phthia when I returned home and grew to manhood. But Patroclus, I give it now to you, for you will never see that home, and I will not return to it either." At his signal, the pyre was lit. Flames leapt high, consuming wood, beasts, treasures, all that had been laid in honor. Smoke rolled upward, thick and dark, carrying the soul of Patroclus to the realm of Hades. The Greeks stood in silence, their faces lit by fire, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that no man, however beloved, escapes the last journey. All night the fire burned, and Achilles kept watch, pacing around it, pouring wine upon the earth, calling the name of Patroclus again and again. He promised vengeance greater still. He promised Hector's body would not yet know rest. He promised his own life would follow soon, bound by destiny. When dawn returned and the fire sank to embers, they gathered the white bones of Patroclus carefully, washing them in wine, wrapping them in soft linen, placing them within a golden urn. The urn was set within a barrow of earth, a mound raised by many hands, so that from the sea the sailors might see it and remember the friend of Achilles. Yet Achilles was not done. He declared funeral games in Patroclus's honor, so that memory would not only mourn but also celebrate. Chariots were brought forth, sleek with sweat, hooves pawing the ground. Athletes prepared for contests of strength and speed, wrestlers and archers, boxers and runners. Prizes were set, tripods, cauldrons, golden cups, strong women, and shining armor. The games began, and for a time grief gave way to contest. The air filled with the thunder of hooves, the roar of the crowd, the struggle of men striving to be first. Odysseus outwitted in the foot race, Ajax grappled until blood stained the sand. Diomedes drove his chariot with skill unmatched, and laughter rose even through tears. It was a moment when the living remembered they were alive, when Patroclus, though gone, seemed to watch from the shadow of smoke, smiling as he had smiled among his friends. Achilles presided, giving prizes, settling disputes, his face stern but softened for once by duty fulfilled. Yet even as the games ended, the weight returned. Patroclus was gone, Hector's body still bound, and the fate of Achilles drew nearer with every step of the sun. When the first contests were ended, Achilles called for more, for grief had turned him restless, unable to sit still, unable to forget. So the games continued, each contest a way of honoring Patroclus, each prize a fragment of remembrance. Archers stepped forth, bows strung with care, arrows feathered with swan's down. They loosed upon a distant mark, and the air thrummed with the flight of shafts. Teucer, famed among the Greeks, struck true, but Meriones followed, his arrows splitting the shaft of the first, and men marveled at the precision. The prizes were given, yet each man, in his heart, offered the shot to Patroclus. Boxers came next, their hands bound with leather thongs. Epeus, massive and unyielding, struck his foe until he fell sprawling, and the crowd roared, though laughter quickly dimmed, for all knew that Patroclus would never smile at such sport again. Wrestlers grappled in the dust, straining with sinews taut, the earth scarred by their struggle. Runners sped across the sand, their feet flashing, their breaths ragged, chasing not only victory, but also the fleeting shadow of life itself. Odysseus, cunning even in the race, used wit as well as speed to claim the crown. And the men cheered, grateful for a spark of levity amid mourning. Achilles watched it all, his face set, his eyes often drifting to the urn where Patroclus's bones lay. No triumph of strength or skill could soothe the emptiness within him. He gave prizes freely, settled quarrels sternly, but his heart remained fixed upon the absence beside him. As the games drew to a close, a hush spread through the camp. Night had come again, cool winds moving across the sea, but still Hector's body lay bound at the ships, dragged daily in dust and dishonor. The gods looked down, and their patience thinned. Apollo, ever protector of Troy, cried out before the assembly of immortals, "Is there no pity among you?" Hector, who honored the gods with sacrifice, lies defiled, his flesh torn, his body dragged by horses round and round the city he defended. Shall we let this outrage stand? Hera, fierce in her hatred of Troy, answered coldly, "Let him rot." He was Priam's son, enemy of the Greeks. His fate is just, Athena nodded, her eyes like stormlight. But Zeus, father of gods and men, spoke with gravity. Hector was dear to me, as are all who keep faith with heaven. Though Achilles is fated soon to die, his heart has grown too wild, too hard. It is not fitting that Hector's body remain in shame. Someone must go to soften the heart of the son of Peleus, the gods murmured. At last Zeus turned to Thetis, who sat apart, mourning the doom of her child. "Go to your son. Tell him the gods are angered. Tell him ransom will come from Priam, bearing treasure beyond measure, and he must release the body. If he refuses, he will draw down wrath even before his destined hour." Thetis bowed her head, sorrow upon sorrow, and descended once more to the sea. In Troy, Priam lay sleepless. He had heard the cries from the wall, had seen the dust rise where Achilles dragged his son. His heart was torn between despair and desperate resolve. At last he called for his attendants, and for the treasures of his house, robes of purple, vessels of gold, jewels that had gleamed in Troy for generations. He placed them upon wagons, a ransom rich enough to tempt even the hardest of men. And though his household wept, he made ready to go himself, an old man, unarmed, into the camp of his enemy, to beg for the body of Hector, his beloved son. Night had spread its dark veil across Troy. But within the palace of Priam, no sleep dared enter. The old king, heavy with years and sorrow, paced the marble halls, his steps unsteady, his heart broken. He had watched from the walls as his son's body was dragged in dust, 3 times each day, bound to the chariot of Achilles. Each time he thought his heart would shatter. Each time he prayed for death, yet death delayed. At last he called his counselors, but none could soothe him. He sent them away and sat alone, cradling his head in his hands. Then, like a sudden flame, Iris, the messenger of Zeus, stood before him, radiant in the night. Her voice was like a stream over stones. "Priam, son of Dardanus, the father of gods, commands you. Gather rich ransom, more than any man has ever borne. Robes, gold, shining vessels, treasures of Troy. Take them in a wagon and go to the camp of the Achaeans. Go alone, save for a single herald. Enter the tent of Achilles and beg for the body of Hector. The gods themselves will guide your path, and Achilles' heart will soften. Fear not, for Hermes will be your guard." The old king trembled, yet hope flickered where none had been. He ordered his sons to bring forth gifts: 12 fine robes, 12 cloaks, 10 talents of gold, shining tripods, cauldrons, cups, and more. His queen Hecuba clung to him, crying, "Do not go, husband. Are you mad to walk into the hands of the man who has slaughtered our children? He will kill you too, and we shall never see you again." But Priam answered, his voice heavy yet steady, "Better to go and face death than to live while Hector lies dishonored. If Achilles will take ransom, then my son may sleep in peace. If he kills me, let it be upon his hands, not mine. My duty is to a father's love," so he made ready. He yoked mules to a sturdy wagon, piled it high with treasures, and placed upon it a great chest filled with gleaming cloths woven by Trojan women. Then, calling his herald Idaeus, he set forth in the night, guided by no torch but the stars. The gods watched. Seeing his courage, Zeus sent Hermes, the swift-footed, to walk beside him, unseen by mortal eyes. Hermes appeared in the form of a young warrior, handsome and strong, and offered to lead him. Priam, though weary, felt comfort in his presence. Together they moved through the night, past sentries who mysteriously slept, past guards whose eyes turned elsewhere, until at last they came to the hut of Achilles, where firelight flickered and sorrow brooded. Hermes touched Priam upon the shoulder, giving him courage, then vanished into the dark. Alone, the old king entered the tent. Inside, Achilles sat apart, his gaze fixed upon the sea, his heart still heavy with rage and grief. The golden armor lay beside him, glowing faintly even in shadow. Near at hand the body of Hector lay, still bound, still desecrated, though untouched by decay, for Apollo had shielded it with his power. Priam came forward, his steps trembling, and knelt before Achilles. He clasped the killer's hands, those dreadful hands that had slain so many of his sons, and kissed them. His voice broke as he cried, "Achilles, remember your father, Peleus, old, frail, longing for his son far away. Pity me, for I am more wretched still. I have kissed the hands that killed my children. I come not with pride, but with tears. Take this ransom, and give me back the body of Hector, my beloved, so that I may bury him with honor." Achilles froze. His heart, hard as bronze, faltered. At the memory of his own father, at the sight of the old king's grief, his wrath cracked. Tears filled his eyes, and he wept. Not only for Patroclus, not only for Hector, but for all men doomed to sorrow. For a long time they knelt together, killer and father, young and old, each weeping for what he had lost. The tent held no sound but the mingling of their grief. At last, Achilles lifted Priam to his feet. "Take comfort, old man. Your courage has moved me. The body of Hector will be returned. 11 days you shall have for burial rites, and no Greek shall disturb you. On the 12th, we fight again. Until then, Troy shall know peace." He ordered his servants to cleanse the body, anoint it with oil, and wrap it in fine linen, hiding the wounds, covering the shame. When it was done, he himself lifted Hector's body upon the wagon, laying it gently as though it were not an enemy, but a brother. Priam gazed upon him, astonished. "You are merciful, though rage consumed you. May the gods remember this when your own fate arrives." Achilles gave him food and drink, for the old man's strength was spent. Together they ate, a moment of strange fellowship in the midst of war. Then Priam slept at last, though sorrow did not leave him, only softened by exhaustion. At dawn, Achilles yoked the mules, loaded the treasures, and sent Priam safely upon his way, guarded by silence, guarded by fate. Dawn rose gentle and pale over Troy, her fingers of light brushing the high towers, touching the broken battlements, and waking the sorrowing city. From the Scaean gate came the sound of wheels and hooves. Priam returning, the body of Hector upon the wagon. Word flew through the streets swifter than any herald, and men and women poured forth, crowding the ways, their cries rising in waves of grief. When the gate opened wide, the people surged forward. They saw their prince, their defender, lying still, wrapped in linen white as cloud, his hair combed, his wounds hidden by oil and balm. A hush fell for a heartbeat, as though the city itself held its breath. Then the wailing began, high, piercing, sorrow unrestrained. Mothers tore their veils, fathers beat their breasts, children clung to skirts and arms, crying though they barely understood. Hecuba, mother of Hector, rushed first. She flung herself upon the body, her hands clawing at the earth, her voice breaking. "O son, dearest of all, pride of my womb, you were my comfort, my strength. Now I see you silent, and I would rather lie with you in death than live to see this day." Her tears fell hot upon his still face. Then Andromache came, wife and widow in a single breath. She held their infant son Astyanax in her arms, the boy wailing in confusion. She set him down and knelt by Hector, pressing her lips to his brow. "Husband, you were my shield, my life. You spoke once that you feared I would be left a widow, and now it has come true. Our son has no father, our house no master. Better that I had died before this day than see you torn from me." She tore her veil and cast it into the dust, her cry piercing the hearts of all who heard. Last came Helen, who had lived in Troy both as treasure and as curse. She stood above the body, her eyes full of tears that had long been withheld. "Hector," she said softly, "of all in Troy, you alone were kind to me. You never spoke harshly, never blamed me though I brought sorrow. You shielded me when others scorned. Now I have lost even you. May my grief follow me forever, for I have no friend left in this city." The people wept with her, for her words struck truth. Hector had been the heart of Troy, and without him, the city was a body without breath. The body was borne through the streets, men lifting it upon their shoulders, women strewing flowers, children reaching to touch the bier as it passed. Priam walked beside it, his head bowed, his robes torn, his hand trembling upon the wagon. Behind him came the elders of Troy, their faces gray, their voices low with lament. At last they reached the place of burial, outside the walls, where a great pyre had been raised. Wood was stacked high, fragrant with cedar and pine. They laid Hector upon it, covering him with rich cloths, with ornaments of gold, with weapons that had been his pride. Priam kissed his son's brow one final time, and then the torches were set. Flame leapt upward, red and gold, devouring cloth, devouring wood, enfolding Hector's body. Smoke rose high, curling toward the sky, carrying his spirit to the halls of Hades. The people stood in silence now. Only the crackle of fire and the sound of weeping filling the air. When the fire sank to ash, they gathered the white bones with reverence, washed them in wine, wrapped them in linen, and placed them in a golden urn. The urn was buried in a deep grave, a mound of earth heaped above it. And upon the mound they raised a great stone, so that all who passed would know where Hector slept. Priam spoke then, his voice frail but clear. Behold Troy, your greatest son. He fought for you, he died for you, and now he rests. As long as the city stands, his name shall live. And so they mourned him. 9 days they wailed, 9 days they feasted in sorrow, and on the 10th they buried him, as was fitting. The Iliad ends here, not with victory nor with peace, but with the funeral of Hector, breaker of horses, beloved of gods and men. The Iliad is not the tale of victory or conquest. It is the song of wrath, grief, and the fragile glory of mortal men. It begins with the anger of Achilles, the greatest of the Greeks, whose quarrel with Agamemnon shook the Achaean host. It flows through the clash of armies, the valor of Hector, the sorrows of women, and the heavy hand of the gods who look on but cannot prevent fate. At its heart lies friendship, Achilles and Patroclus, and the terrible cost of its loss. The death of Patroclus ignites a storm, and Achilles, driven by love and fury, slaughters without mercy, even defying the river itself. The world bends beneath his rage until at last he meets Hector, Troy's noblest son, in a duel fated from the beginning. Hector falls, and with him falls the hope of Troy. Yet, even amid vengeance, the poem finds its most human moment. Old Priam kneeling before the killer of his son, and Achilles, at last, weeping with him. In their shared grief, for a fleeting instant, enmity gives way to compassion. The song ends not with the fall of the city, but with the funeral of Hector, breaker of horses. Troy still stands, the war still rages, but the Iliad closes with mourning, reminding us that glory fades, wrath consumes, and only memory endures. Thus ends the Iliad, a song of wrath and sorrow, closing with the funeral of Hector, tamer of horses. If you have traveled this long road with us, may the story linger in your heart like the echo of a lyre across time. Thank you for listening. Tell us where in the world you are joining from, and which tale you would like to hear next. Until then, may peace and memory guide your dreams.